All right, so the motives, processes, and results of imperialism. This handout is shared with you as part of this post, so you can pull it up if you'd like. You can write on the handout or highlight on the handout, and I'm just going to give you the definitions and the motivations. So the interesting thing about imperialism here is that it's any form of control exercised by one group of people over another beyond the group's own borders. And this is interesting because it brings in what we learned about in the last chapter, which is the spheres of influence. So it's not limited to only the direct colonization. It's also indirect. There can be direct imperialism, like direct control over government and economy, where there's a direct rule, meaning like there's a direct connection from one government to another, the parent company to the colony. And then there's also indirect imperialism, which is the idea of, let me make sure that this is done, there we go. The idea of not controlling the government, but controlling the economy and controlling trade routes or having unequal treaties. We see this oftentimes with the British East India Company and with this, again, the spheres of influence that we have in China and the capitulations in the Ottoman Empire. Imperialism is not just political, therefore, it is also economic and cultural. And by cultural, we mean the idea, this gets into kind of a social Darwinism vein where one culture, European, is superior to another in the mindset of imperialists. And in the 19th century, imperialism grew so that Europe dominated approximately 84% of the Earth's surface, which is a lot. In terms of motivations, there are many. And we'll start by looking at, I'm going to erase these really quick. Let's make sure that I got, there we go. Okay. So the prior motivation for imperialism had been economic, and that was mainly because of mercantilism, where countries were trying to establish places where they could get raw materials, and also so that they had export markets. But in the 15th through the 19th century, the imperialists used economic liberalism, or the idea of free trade, like we saw in the Opium Wars, as their rationale. Was this free trade? Absolutely not. But they used that as their rationale. They were like, oh, this is capitalist markets. This is just capitalism at work, even though their government was heavily involved in these markets. This imperialism was sold as an advantage to people because they could get more materials, they could increase wealth, rise the standard of living, increase markets. So again, like just that general getting back to kind of capitalist ideals. And then it was also a place for Europeans to put extra population because their population growth was extreme at this time. And they didn't have enough room for people in cities. So it was a way for them to kind of reduce their population burden without sacrificing the economic and military advantages of a large population, because they could still call on that population if needed. There was also national security at stake. We see this with places like Hawaii, and Singapore. Strategic locations that make it easier to get to other colonies, also Egypt, for the British. It was supposed to divert attention away from problems at home. As we'll see, it didn't usually do that. And it was supposed to be a humanitarian, civilizing mission. So the idea was that European culture was so great, and it should be the dominant culture around the world. This also is linked to the idea of social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. And this, again, like we said in class on Friday, is kind of a misnomer because Darwin never applied his theories to humans. That was more Herbert Spencer. But this is basically the end results of racism, and that Europeans were, you know, by design better than other peoples or people of European descent. And then you have the rising tides of nationalism. So this was a arena of competition for these different European states. More colonies. The more colonies you have, the better your country is. When we talk about the civilizing merchant too, you have to remember things like sati. The practice of sati in India were used to justify imperialism because they said, oh, these people, this practice is so barbaric, we need to make this stop. Okay, so those are the motivations of imperialism. The other document you have, and this one is also helpful to you, is comparing new and old imperialism. So you can also use this document um, to figure out how we were learning about imperialism before and how we're learning about imperialism now. And the chart goes through differences in all these different categories. So as you can see, like there was still a religious focus, but there's Protestant versus Catholic, and there was more humanitarianism in the second time around, different geographic focuses. And on the back side of this sheet, you will see the similarities. And these similarities are equally important to the differences and are also useful to you when you're reviewing. So, good luck with your maps. Your maps will show you the extent of imperialism. Like we saw, Europe controlled 84% of the Earth's surface, which is quite a lot. So it's important to understand geographically where these different countries had colonies. Have a wonderful day.